Well, welcome to Jesus at the Movies. Excuse my voice this morning. It's a little different. It's all the stuff in the air, right? We'll blame it on that. You know, I love movies. I love movies. You know, I realize there's a lot of controversy around movies because we talk about how movies can shape what we think, what we believe, and how we act. But I gotta tell you, as a kid growing up, in my teens, movies meant so much to me because family could be kind of like, oh, that's kind of scary, that's kind of rough, and I could escape into this movie. I mean, when I was really young as a kid, you know, I could escape through a cartoon. And frankly, it became even more than an escape because I would watch a movie and I could see myself in a different kind of life. I could see that, well, this life right here, it's not going so good right now. It's not going good between my parents. It's not going good, some of you know, through family suicide, all these different things that were part of my upbringing. But I could imagine that there was a different kind of life that could be had. So movies, TV shows today, Netflix, I mean, some of that stuff can be really life-giving. The question that we have as we talk about Jesus at the movies is, does God have anything to tell us? With all these ideas, with all these images that we get bombarded with through movies, and we believe he does. And I watched, you know, just listening with you to this trailer of the movie Wonder, which we're looking at today, I go, I love this movie. And this movie is quite unique, I'll give you that. It's a very specific kind of situation, but it is totally relatable. And what I mean by that is this. The movie actually comes from a book. And the book is called Wonder. You can get it out from the library, even digitally. Just go on and you can read the book. But the author of the book wrote out of this experience that she had. She was with her little 3-year-old boy, and they were getting an ice cream. And there was a little girl with her family in the lineup that looked very different. She had this similar condition that this little boy portrays, Augie, in the movie. And so the author's son, 3-year-old son, he just started to wail because he was scared. Like, he looked at this little girl, just like totally freaked out. And the mom's kind of thinking, yeah, I gotta get out of here. Like, don't wanna hurt the little girl's feelings anymore, and I just need to escape. And so she grabbed her little boy and then like right out of the store. Of course, made a bigger scene than she wanted to make, as that often happens. But she said, and here's what really convicted her and led to the writing of her book and now to the movie. She said, as she was leaving, she heard the mom of that little girl say to the little girl and to her family these words. She said it in a sweet and as calm a voice as you can imagine. And the author's response to that, and that just got to me. You know, what I could be teaching my children so they could understand how to respond better next time. I was disappointed in myself. And that's the movie. You know, that's the book. That's the movie. Really, who do you and I aspire to be? How do we get to the place of where we want to be? And even if you haven't seen the movie, you've kind of caught through the trailer that this movie focuses on the experience of this 10-year-old boy. He has this Treacher-Collins syndrome, which can really alter how you look facially. And so this little boy now is facing the tension of being homeschooled by his mom to 10 years of age. And now the tension is around our little boy, who everybody goes, whoa, like, what happened to you? Our little boy is going into public school. And we get this as parents, right? Like, I mean, you take your little baby and you hand them off to school and you're kind of like, whoa, how, you know, it's kind of scary. It's like, how is this going to go for them? Well, exponentially more, really, for Augie and his experience of going into grade 5 public school for the first time. And how are the kids going to accept him? How are the kids going to relate and react to him? What really spoke to me in the movie, and of course every time you have a movie, it's like you're going 100 different directions. But the thing that really struck me were there were these 3 precepts, they're called. Now, a precept is a rule for behavior or action. These 3 precepts that the teacher of the homeroom class that Augie attended put on the blackboard. So through the course of the year, here are these 3 precepts, and I think these precepts are probably familiar to all of us. The first one you can see up here, it goes like this: when given the choice between being right and being kind, choose kind. Now, I don't know if you've heard that before, you maybe have. I read it and heard it in the movie, and I thought to myself, is that right? Is that true? Is that like, is it not important sometimes to be right? Is not being right, right? Or, you know, do you need to balance that with kindness? I said, like, you know, I was sort of overwhelmed with the thought that sometimes you need to be right. But that's not really what it's saying. It's saying when there's a choice between being right and kind, choose kind. And you know, when I think about that, I get that. Because in our early years of marriage, you know, Sandy didn't tell me at the time, but later on, you know, she let me in on this experience. It's like, you always had to be right. Every conversation, every argument, well, we didn't argue, but, you know, every disagreement is like, you always had to be right. It's like you always had to win. It's like, yeah. There was just something inside of me, you know, maybe something inside of you that you get into these conversations with people. It's like, I gotta win. You know, it's all about winning. It's all about being right. And it's just stepping back and going, what about the relationship? What about the value of the relationship? What about kindness in your relationships? How does that play out? Well, about halfway through the year, a second precept comes onto the board, and I'll just say, I love this one. Love, love, love this one. And you can see up here, your deeds are your monuments. Your deeds are your monuments. Just think about that for a moment. You know, we have this really, this weird expression in the English language, and it goes like this, maybe you know it. The road to hell. Is that the road to hell? The road to hell is paved with what? Good intentions. And that's what I hear when I read this precept and going, it's so easy for us to live in our intentions and not recognize, oh man, my intentions, my thoughts, my beliefs, they really matter at the point that they are translated into action. Your deeds are your monuments. I get that. And then finally there is this precept that the teacher finishes the year off, and I think we've all heard this one as well, and it goes like this: be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. You know, I was at the door last week here at City Life, and somebody came in and I kind of, well, how's your day going? And they said, oh, I just heard, like just now, that my boyfriend's father is in the emergency room in the hospital. And it's kind of like, oh, wow. I mean, you know, we walk through the door, we have a smile on our face, you know, we probably had a shower, we smell good, we look good. But you could be sitting here this morning surrounded by people going, you have no idea, right? You have no idea what's going on in my life. Now multiply that through all of the interactions that you and I have every day, and you think about the complexity of human relationship and how you engage people. And for those of us that say, hey, I'm a follower of Jesus, the difference we can make when we have that awareness of what is actually going on, the battles that are going on, just the awareness that battles are going on and being fought in people's lives. So the point is this: you watch this movie, I think you're inspired by this movie, you watch these precepts playing out in all kinds of different relationships, in all kinds of different ways, and you're sort of overwhelmed with the importance of kindness and going, I need to be kind, I need to be compassionate. Kindness and compassion is important. I aspire, right? I aspire to be a better person, a kind person, a compassionate person. Now the tension is this. Every culture, every people group, every heritage, every religion, every family for that matter, they have precepts. You know, these rules for action and behavior that the culture or people or religion all go, that's what we aspire to. That's what we want to live up to. That's even the measure. That's where we set the bar for believing that we're good people and that we're living good lives. The tension is this. Our world and the relationships that we experience, in spite of all these precepts, are not always the way that we want them to be. You follow your Twitter feeds, you listen to the news, whatever source you follow, and you go, man, I can't believe it. Like, look at the condition at times of this world. Never mind to get really personal and go, the tension at times in my own relationships. I aspire to this, I long for this, I believe this to be true, and yet my experience at times is so different. You know what I find absolutely fascinating is that Jesus, he faced these two very issues head on: precepts and kindness. And he has this experience that starts out with this religious expert, this expert in the law, he is called. And that was the thing in Jesus' time. This was very serious in Jesus' time. These experts in the law, they knew the letter of the law, they had an interpretation around the law, they debated the law. Their life, in a sense, revolved around, what does the law say? What do you think it says? This is what I think it says. What does that look like? I don't know. What do you think it looks like? We should do it this way. And on. It was a big deal. And this expert in the law comes to Jesus, and he's got this question. Now, the whole thing is set up like this. He came to test Jesus. He didn't come with a pure heart. It wasn't like, oh, we've got this burning question. I wonder what Jesus has to say about it. It was like, a group of his buddies and him were like, hey, what a good idea to test Jesus. What's the best question we can ask to test Jesus? And so this is the guy, hey, you do it. Go ahead, you do it. Push it to the front of the crowd. You ask. And he asks. And the question is this. He says, basically, Jesus, teacher, what do I have to do to gain eternal life? How do I inherit eternal life? What does that look like? What does that call on from me? It's a good question. Really, it's a good question. It's an interesting question. It's like, hey, if there's an afterlife, if there's eternal life, well, how does somebody make sure that they're going to end up on the right side, the good side of that? And yet, again, this guy was testing Jesus, and Jesus goes, okay, well, let's talk about that. And like any good teacher, incredibly frustrating, but like with any good teacher, he asks the guy a question. It's like, what's your question? I don't know, I'll give you another question. Like, here, you answer my question, then I'll answer your question. It's like, well, that doesn't help. But so Jesus he asks this question of this religious expert. And what Jesus is doing, he's actually engaging in just the custom of the day. This is how people would engage with thoughts and ideas, and we don't necessarily do that today. And so Jesus, in spite of the fact of going, this guy's out to test me, he doesn't have a pure heart, he engages in the conversation, which is important to think about. And so he asks the guy, okay, you're asking me this question. You're the legal expert. Like, why? Why are you asking me? What does the law say, right? He asks, what does the law say? And then he says, how do you interpret it? How do you interpret it? And so Jesus is engaging with this guy. And how the guy responds is quite fascinating, really, because what he says back to Jesus is often called the Great Commandment. And he says to him, basically here, you got to love God with everything that you are. You want to have this kind of eternal inheritance? Okay? Everything that you are. Love God. All your mind, all your strength, all your power, all your heart. Love God. And then love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, really, at this point, the conversation, it could have ended. It could have been done. Because Jesus is like, hey, you nailed it. It's like, there you go, gold star. You did good. And the guy responded with this answer, and it was sort of like Jesus is going, why did you ask me the question? Like, you knew the answer. answer. So why are we even talking about this? Because you have nailed it. But here's the really interesting thing. The guy doesn't let the conversation go. And I think this is where the weight of what Jesus is saying really applies to each one of us and applies to this movie, Wonder. Because here's the guy's response. Notice how it's introduced. Looking for a loophole, huh? Looking for a loophole. It's like, you know, when it comes down to it, if we just talk about these philosophical things, if we just talk about religion and, you know, yeah, worship and, you know, church and like, yeah, I know what to do. Like, yeah, I pray, I do that. It's kind of like, yeah, it's okay. But when it comes down to the practical, it's like, what does that mean? Like, what does this actually require from me? How could this maybe interrupt my life and make a difference in how I interact with people around me? It's kind of like, where's the loophole? There's got to be a loophole, right? It's like, there's got to be a way out of this. This doesn't apply to me. There's got to be a loophole. And this is what the guy says. And just how would you define neighbor? How would you define neighbor? Now, here's the really interesting thing. In Jesus' day, there was a definition for neighbor. And so you had this list. And some people were on the list. And you went, there's my neighbor. Are you my neighbor? Here's the list. Yeah, you're my neighbor. Yeah, good. Check. And then there was a list of people, if you will, that non-neighbors, you know? Like maybe they were on the list and they got crossed off the list. Or maybe they never made it onto the list whatsoever. But there was sort of this strict interpretation around somebody's a neighbor and somebody's not a neighbor. I feel responsibility to this guy. I don't feel responsibility to that person. I don't really care what happens to them because they're not on the list. And the fact is, that's not just true about Jesus' time, is it? It's like maybe through our experience that we had, maybe through information that we've been given, maybe because of the way we were brought up, we go, oh, yeah, that's a neighbor. That's not a neighbor. Huh? I don't want anything to do with that person. And they're not on the list, and we kind of go, that's okay. They're not on the list. And so Jesus really blows this whole thing up. And he goes, let me broaden your understanding. Let me open your eyes and your heart to who your neighbors are. And he tells one of his best-known stories that actually is still influential in our culture here today. And Jesus talks about this guy that we know as the Good Samaritan. And if you're in church today for the very first time, and if you are, by the way, it's fantastic. Welcome here. It's so wonderful to have you. But even if you're in church for the first time, I say Good Samaritan, and you know what I'm talking about. But we have a picture of a Good Samaritan, somebody that does this act of kindness, that lives out compassion in their life, is a Good Samaritan. And the story that Jesus tells, you know, it's a very simple story. It's a very clear story. It's a story that's powerful, that doesn't have a lot of ambiguity. And the story, the gist of it is kind of like this. There's this guy, and he's walking down this road. And it's not just, you know, any road. It's not like South Fraser or whatever. Maybe it could be South Fraser. But anyway, the reason I say that is because this road is notoriously dangerous. This road is likened to being in the inner city late at night in a place you should never be. Like you get lost, and you know you're in Yale Town, and you get lost, and you end up in downtown East Side, and you're in some dark alley, and you're like, danger, danger, danger. That's this kind of road. And sure enough, this guy gets jumped, he gets beaten up, he gets robbed, and he's left for dead. And as he's laying there, you know, left for dead on the side of the road, two guys come by, one after the other. And the audience in Jesus' day, certainly this legal expert who's listening to him, they're going, oh, okay. Because these two guys, they're people to the guy who's laying left for dead on the side of the road. They're his people, he's their people, speak the same language, they look the same, they attend the same synagogue, probably shop at the same Costco. These are his people. And if we're watching this, from a distance, we see one guy come down the road, we see the second guy come down the road, and we're just like, the cavalry has arrived. The hero is on the scene. Like, no mistaking. These guys are on the neighbor list. All three of them, they're on my list. I should do something about this guy lying on the side of the road, all beaten up and bloody and dying. The point and bomb that Jesus drops is that these two guys, a priest and a Levite, they pass by. And they don't only pass by, they cross to the other side of the road. It's kind of like they're walking down and it's like, squirrel, and they're over here. They're just, I didn't see that. There's nothing going on over there. And they just keep on walking down the road. Now the audience in Jesus' day would have been flabbergasted. They would have been like, wow, we know it's a dangerous road, but those guys should have stopped. Those guys are neighbors. They have responsibility. They didn't stop. What is with those guys? But Jesus' story continues, and here's kind of where he gives the 1-2 punch. Because he introduces the third guy walking down the road. He introduces him with these words, if you can look up on the screen here. Then a despised Samaritan came along. Now, Jesus is not resorting to hyperbole here, okay? Jesus isn't exaggerating. Everybody in Jesus' audience would be going, oh, that's right, the despised Samaritan. I mean, Jesus wouldn't even have to have said despised. Like, he would have just said Samaritan, and everyone would have gone despised like that. Those Samaritans, like, I know him. He's going to pick up a rock, and he's going to walk over, and he's going to bash that guy in the head and finish him off for good. Like, that's a Samaritan. And so there is this strong feeling, this strong sentiment among the crowd, because the Samaritan is not on the neighbor list. For the Samaritan, the Jewish guy that's dying at the side of the road, he's not on his neighbor list either. This person is about as far removed from the neighbor list as you can imagine. The Samaritan to the Jewish person was literally called a half-breed. They were less than human. You didn't want contact with them. You didn't want to touch them. You get cooties and all the rest of it. It was just like, keep yourself separate from these non-neighbor Samaritans. So just to set it up, that's the tension and the drama that's going on here in Jesus' story. And then you look as Jesus continues along. He's a non-neighbor. No, sorry, just back one more, thanks. And when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. He's not my neighbor, but I feel compassion. He is motivated. His deed becomes his monument because he sees this man through the eyes, if you will, the actions of compassion. And look at what he does here. So look up here. We read about his actions, going over to him, not crossing to the other side of the road. The Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his donkey and he took him to an inn where he took care of him. You think of the incredible cost here. How over and above this non-neighbor Samaritan went in the display of his compassion. That he stopped in that road that continued to be risky and dangerous, to kneel down and to clean the wounds of this guy. He put him on his donkey, even though I'm sure it inconvenienced his life to not ride, but to carry somebody along who was badly injured. He stopped at the inn, and he didn't just go, there you go, like flop off the donkey. He's your neighbor, you innkeeper, you take care of him, right? It's like he cared for him. In fact, he spent a day himself to go, I want to see this through. I want to make sure this guy is really on the road to recovery. And then he actually invested. And he said, here's a few coins. And if it's more than that, I want to pay for that recovery as well. It's just this amazing picture of someone going over and above when they're not even on the neighbor list and investing in this person that in a sense is as far removed from you as you can possibly think. It may not be a stretch to say, these guys were enemies, really. I mean, the Samaritan wasn't the bandit that beat him up, but in a way he could have been. Like, that's the animosity that existed between these groups of people. And what I want you to notice is how Jesus sums up the story. because he asks another question of the religious expert. You can see up here, now which of these three would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Remember, he's not on the neighbor list, but Jesus asked the question, which of these three would you say is the neighbor? You want a definition, you want an answer to your question, who is my neighbor? Who would you say was the neighbor? Here, not a lot of ambiguity, is it? It's just like, okay. But notice, the man replied, the one, he didn't say Samaritan, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said, yes, now go and do the same. Now, I don't know about you, but I hear that, I hear what Jesus says, and it almost feels like to me that Jesus is sort of saying the same thing as the movie Wonder. And we live in this broken world. We live with a lot of hurt people around us. Like you go out, downtown, wherever you encounter during the day, and you go, man, there is a lot of people that are in pain around us. And it kind of seems like what Jesus is saying about compassion and kindness is what it seems like the movie is saying. It's like, you want to live a good life? Okay. You want to go to heaven? Okay. Then you just need to live out this precept, right? This rule for action and behavior, and it's all going to be good. Everything is going to be fine with you. Now, if that's what Jesus is saying, then I got to be blunt. That really sucks. And that's really not very consistent with Jesus. See, what I mean is this. I listen to a movie like Wonder. I watch a movie like Wonder. I read precepts about the good things that I should do. And you know what? I am motivated and I am inspired to be compassionate and kind. Usually for a really brief time. Right? It's like if my experience of the good life and some kind of eternal reward, some kind of eternity is dependent on my deeds of compassion and mercy and kindness, then frankly, friends, I'm doomed. I am doomed. Now, don't get me wrong. I want to be compassionate. I aspire to be a kind and compassionate person. But I'm a little weak and inconsistent in my execution. What about you? What about you? But what's Jesus saying? What's Jesus saying? Because I think all of us would agree it is cool, not cruel, it is cool to be kind, right? We aspire. We want to be kind. We want to be compassionate people. What about this inconsistency? What about this inability, this ineffectiveness of rules and precepts to get us there? Well, I actually think the movie helps us answer this question. And I just want you to take a look at, just listen to this scene between Augie, the son, and his father. I think it is a powerful, instructive scene. For me, that's the game changer. That is the game changer in this movie. It is the game changer in Augie's experience in terms of how Augie, this little 10-year-old boy, can face all this hardship and all this pain. Because let's face it, he looks different. Let's face it, the rejection, it doesn't go away. He continually experiences in life. But the game changer is this, that he has a dad, that he has a mom that speak into his life, that live out actions, that instill in Augie this deep sense of how deeply loved he is. In the words of his father, in the midst of Augie's pain, I love your face. Don't cover up your face. Don't hide your face. Recognize how deeply loved you are. In the words of his mother, Augie, you are such a wonder. Sometimes you're overwhelmed by the pain and the sadness and the rejection. But hold on to the wonder of who you are. And that love and sense of personal wonder is actually what transforms Augie and keeps him being such an incredible influence for compassion and kindness in the lives of others. You just watch the movie to see how that's true. I won't, make this into a spoiler if you haven't seen the movie, but there's one scene in the graduation of the class, and it's just like, that is so, so amazing. But I just want to call us to a time out right here. Because if I'm saying to you the difference in life is this, that we have a deep sense of being loved, that we understand what a wonder each of us truly is, we may go, I don't think that's true. I think that the people that walk around going, I'm a wonder, that go around, I am so deeply loved, are people that are so self-centered and have such a swelled head that they're not the people that are pouring out compassion and kindness because they're so into themselves. Social scientists and researchers would tell us that's actually furthest from the truth. That the people in our culture and time that are so narcissistic, and there is some talk about this is maybe the most narcissistic time in the history of the world where people are so self-centered, that narcissism, it actually comes from someone's insecurity. Not from their sense of being loved and being a wonder, but from the insecurity, so that in every relationship a person engages in, there is this attempt to prove oneself that I am somebody, that I am important, that I am valuable. And so there becomes this incredible, as I said, game changer in the life of Augie, as he recognizes how deeply, as he experiences how deeply loved and what a wonder he is through the words and the actions of his mom and his dad and his people around him that are continually reinforcing and speaking into his life with those words of affirmation and truth, which become the same point of transformation for each one of us. See, precepts don't have the power to transform our lives into lives that are defined by compassion and kindness. Only this experience of profound love has the power to do that. So as we think back to Jesus' story, the point is this: that our lives start being defined by compassion and kindness when we experience Jesus as our Good Samaritan. When we recognize that Jesus is the one who looks at us, lying at the side of the road, bloody, beat up, messed up, broken up, not very pretty, and that Jesus, unlike the religious, unlike the legalist, doesn't cross to the other side of the road and say, did you see something? I didn't see something. But that he kneels down beside us. And he wraps his arms around us. And he looks into our eyes. And he says, I love that face. Don't hide it. Don't run from me. Don't allow your life to be defined by your brokenness and your messes and your pain and your hurt. Allow my words, that scene in the trailer with Julia Roberts, allow my words as your heavenly Father to define who you are, to give you such a deep sense of being a wonder and of being loved, that you actually start living out compassion and kindness because it becomes a reflection of your Heavenly Father's amazing, compassionate love for you. And maybe this morning, as we talk about kindness and compassion, you got words running through your head. Maybe words that you had with your kids this morning, even as you're getting ready for church. Maybe with your spouse, or maybe with a friend or a co-worker. We all aspire to lives of kindness and compassion, but so often it goes sideways. What can we do What can we do for things to be different? And I want to suggest this morning, I want to give you homework, if you will, and I'm going to give you 3 things to do. First of all, I want to encourage you, find a quiet place this week, open up a Bible or turn on the YouVersion app. You know, you have the Bible with you wherever you go. Look at that. And turn to Luke chapter 10, as you can see up here. Read this story of the Good Samaritan. Take some time. Think about what's being said here. And then see yourself in the place of that man, that broken man on the side of the road. And Jesus, the Good Samaritan, he comes to you. And he holds you. And he heals your wounds. And he looks into your eyes. He says, do you realize what a wonder you are? Do you realize I love this face? Hear his words. Receive his words. Remember his words. But don't stop there. Because you and I live in this broken, messy, troubled world. Allow Jesus' compassion to you as your Good Samaritan to translate into your acts of compassion and kindness to others. And as we do that, Abbotsford, our city, and the world around us will know that God is for them through us. Would you bow with me? Heavenly Father, how immense your love is. I thank you that your love, your declaration of the wonder that we are and who we have created to be and how we've been wired and all the uniqueness about us actually becomes the contribution that you want us to make in the world, that you have created us to make in the world. And so today, would you overwhelm each one of us with that experience, like drive it deep in our heart, that you love us, that you love our face, and that we are a wonder to you. And then we know it's a daily challenge to remember that. So God, through your Holy Spirit, would you just continue to speak those words of love and reassurance into our life that would take wings and would translate into our ability to pour out not even our own, but your love and kindness and mercy into the lives of those around us. I ask this in Jesus' name.